Hello, my name is Kin Chan, and I'll be presenting on the Falkland Islands, also known as Isla Malvinas. The islands is separated into two large segments. There's West Falklands and East Falklands, and some important locations to know going into the next slide is Saunders Island in the north of West Falklands and Port Louis on the northeast of East Falkland, and as well as the modern day capital of Stanley on the far right by the airport. So, the history of its inhabitants prior to 1833 is potentially in prehistoric times. There's some evidence that there may have been Tierra del Fuego or natives from Argentina and Chile that have lived on the island. But since then, there has been no other human record since then. In 1764, the French established a port on East Falkland, and then 66, the British settled on Saunders on West Falkland. It is unknown if they knew of each other's existence, but I believe after a given amount of time they would have ran into each other and knew of each other's existence, but simply not reported it back to their respective countries. In 1770, there was a back and forth between the French, Spain, and the British. The French had gifted the settlement as payment for dues that they had to bolster their relationship with Spain. And not Spain, a fleet from Buenos Aires, under the assumption of Spain, evicted the British settlement off the island. But Spain, the country, had actually did not authorize such an action and had disowned this action and was immediately returned to the British. And Spain actually left behind a garrison until 1811, but I believe even the British didn't know of its true existence. Even if they did, it was not substantial. But 3 years after that, the British had to leave because they had to dissolve the settlement because they were unable to maintain it due to its expenses and remote location. In 1826, Buenos Aires comes back again, granting Louis Vernet the permission to man the islands with fisheries and whaling outposts. And in 1831, he had seized 3 U.S. ships over fishing rights near the islands, and this caused a dispute, which would later result in the American ship USS Lexington arriving to the island and destroying the settlement and then deporting whatever settlers were left behind. But in 1833, after the Americans had left, they actually didn't do anything with the islands. They just simply left. The British returned to assert sovereignty and kindly asked any remaining Argentinian outpost that was on the island to leave, and they did so peacefully. So, the history of food from this point on is likely Falklands lamb, or lamb that was brought from elsewhere, such as Britain, or from South America. Even going as far back up until recently, the 1980s, the economy was heavily dependent on wool because lamb was the most abundant livestock that they had on the island. And historically, they haven't eaten much other than mutton stew most of the time, according to the BBC. And as well as farmland, there's actually, as you've seen on the maps, the islands are quite big, and there's no shortage of farmland on the Falklands. And kelpers have historically been so reliant on imported vegetables year round, so they need constant replenishment. And kelpers are what people refer the people that live on the island as, because the islands are surrounded by lots of kelp, and they actually don't have good access to lots of high-end fertilizers to sustain their crops and farmland, so they harvest kelp that's washed up on shore and use that as fertilizer for their farmland. There's also a good chance that people prior to current day had eaten penguins and even collected and pickled penguin eggs, as some residents mention that it is recorded in that previous generations would often collect and pickle penguin eggs as a delicacy. But it's likely shifted more towards penguin eggs rather than penguins nowadays because they're a protected creature. And these are some examples of boiled penguin eggs. And the interesting thing about penguin eggs is their shells are thicker than traditional like chicken eggs, and they have a special protein where when boiled, their egg white is actually not white, it's actually somewhat translucent, and the egg yolk is sort of like a reddish orange type of color. And it isn't legal to simply just go out and take penguin eggs. You need to be certified in order to go out and conduct such harvests. And another potential food that people prior to current day, prior to 1833, that they had eaten, and even up until maybe World War II, was likely these two freshwater fishes, zebra trout and Falkland's minnow, as these are scattered across different streams and ponds across the island. But as of recently, they're becoming endangered due to the introduction of different other fishes, which I will get into later. But this is likely what the people that had settled on the island had eaten, as this is probably what they had access to. There's also the Falkland seals, as this may have been what settlers needed to eat in times of dire need. There's the southern sea lion, there's the South American fur seal, and as well as the southern elephant seal, but it's likely not that often they would need to resort to eating such meat, as they had mostly harvested them for other reasons, usually for fur or blubber. So going into the demographics, this is the current day demographics of the Falklands Islands. So there's 48% of the island is people who identify as Falkland Islanders, a good percentage of British, St. Helenian, Chilean, mixed, other, and unspecified as of 2016. Prior to, I would say, the late 1900s, commercial vegetable growing really growing there wasn't viable because the population was so small. But in the last 20 to 30 years, the population has boomed due to tourism, and also there's a mention of a permanent British defense garrison there, so that actually ups the population by several thousand. So nowadays the Falklands has become more of a exporter of certain things because of globalization in the last 30 years. So brown trout was an external species of fish that was introduced in and around the freshwater of the Falkland Islands, and this was a very large disruptor of zebra trout, which led to its massive decline and shrinking of population of locations where the fish could thrive without being outcompeted. And there's also the mention of Falklands lamb, and you can order slow braised local shoulder of lamb from the Malvina House Hotel. But nowadays, Falklands is also known for its huge squid export, the Ilex squid or the Argentine shortfin, and its migration pattern is in the upper right, as it's near, I believe that's the outlet of the Amazon River, so there's a lot of minerals flowing into the sea, and all that seems to drift out southward, and the squid sort of follows that path, and a lot of them pass through and around the Falklands Islands. And nowadays, or it was, I believe it was back in 2002, that squid and another one would make up 46% of the world's squid catch. So this area is actually a very overfished area, part of the globe, in terms of squid harvests. And these are some lamb recipes from the Falkland Islands Meat Company that they have on the website to show ways you can cook with their lambs. Roast rack of lamb, pan fried sirloin steak, standing rib roast, sausage casserole, marinated lamb kebabs, burgers. And it's been difficult to get more images from what people nowadays eat on the island, as it's mostly just menus and occasionally people showing off on social media, but it's not well labeled what food is what. But I did speak with the director of the Falklands Island Museum, Andrea Barlow, and she mentions that nowadays there's well over 60 nationalities, and the food is very diverse, but there's a strong influence from St. Helena, and for reference, St. Helena is northeast of the Falklands, and it's close proximity to Africa more than South America, so it's another isolated island. So that would make sense that these type of islands would share food. There's plo, which is that image on the upper left, which is sort of a mash of different meats and veggies. There's curry, there's tuna fish cakes, there's Chilean food like cazuela. That's the one in the middle and the upper middle with the shrimp and soup. Empanadas, pastel del choco, which is on the upper right, and there's British food, of course, because as we saw in the demographics, a good portion of the people living on the islands are of British descent. Shepherd's pie, roast dinners, and there's a good portion of their food that gets imported as well as exported, as lamb has been viable as an export, so that would sometimes show up in British supermarkets, Falklands lamb. And these are the foods prior and post colonization of the islands. Thank you. And these are my resources.